welcome back to my channel. How you doing? Hope everything's good. What's going on? Anyway, also sorry, there's building work going on outside my house, so if it picks up, I'm very sorry. Trust me, they woke me up at 8 a.m. this morning. Trust me, I know they're there. So as you do, I was rewatching Pretty Little Liars last night, and I was watching a few episodes that kind of surround the night that Alison went missing. Obviously, we all know, spoiler, I mean, if you're watching this and you haven't finished the show, then you need to be not here. Come back. Watch the show and come back. Anyway, as we know, Alison DiLaurentis is obviously alive and well, and nothing actually happened to her that night. I mean, no. Things did happen. I mean, she just wasn't killed. Anyway, so we obviously know the night that she went missing, she went on a world tour. It was her in that yellow top against the world, and no one was stopping them. Truly, it was like Dua Lipa's world tour during the pandemic. Very much, she was there. She had to do what she had to do. But obviously, she comes back. She's not been killed. Blah, 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 blah. However, I thought, what if Alison DiLaurentis actually did die that night? And who would have, actually killed her? So I came up with 3 kind of suspects, or 3 people that I would have at the top of my list, and rewritten it so that they have been the ones to have done it, if that makes any sense. I had so much fun with this because honestly, I kind of wish... No, that's very mean of me to say. That's very mean of me to say. I kind of wish Alison actually was killed. I know. Don't shoot the messenger, I don't know, I feel like when she went missing, she kind of lost her crown. When she came back and she had that whole redemption arc, which was the worst thing to happen to her character. So maybe keeping her dead would not have been a bad thing, and maybe actually killing her off, because obviously this whole time it's kind of alluded to that she's alive and she's not actually dead, but low-key, what if she just actually was dead? Do you know what I mean? So anyway, I've come up with my top 3 suspects in this situation of who I would have had to have killed Alison if Alison did die. My suspect number 1, or the person I would have had done it, I'm just gonna say person I would have had done it because I have 3 choices, because I couldn't really pick. I was kind of in denial. Not denial, I don't know, I was just all of these characters kind of fit killing Alison. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, the first person is Ezra, and I would have done a whole storyline where kind of he was completely obsessed with her. I've just watched Cruel Summer, which is another kind of teen drama thing, and it's kind of the same storyline in which this guy is obsessed with this girl, and a bunch of things happen. And that kind of inspired me with this story, in terms of, obviously we know Ezra and Alison had that kind of fling relationship that was going on, and he didn't know of her age. However, I feel the night that she went missing, when she gets into his car and they have that little discussion, why didn't you tell me how old you were, whatever, I kind of picture, instead of Alison getting out the car to continue her world tour, to do Alison DiLaurentis the Eras tour, what if Ezra kind of takes Alison to his house and they have a big argument, and Alison's I'm gonna tell the police everything, and then Ezra's you've tricked me here and you've got me in a position where what am I supposed to do? And they have a big argument. And I feel Ezra is the type of character, I feel he's one of the very few characters that would have this kind of anger inside of him to possess killing a teenager, because you'd have to go to extreme lengths to kill a teenager, and you'd have to be a very dark person to do that. And I feel Ezra is that person. So I feel they would have an argument, and Ezra kind of snaps, and then just kind of goes into this headspace where it's so much anger that he just ends up killing Alison, and he doesn't realize what he's doing until Alison is dead. And then when she's dead, he's oh my god, what have I done? Because I really liked the Ezra reveal when not that he was A, but he alluded to he was A, and he was writing his book and going into the A layer, whatever. I really like that reveal, because I truly think Ezra is one of the characters who has this dark possession about him, and I feel if you actually explore his character deep down, I think that we could get to layers which are so dark and disturbing to the point where he actually killed Alison. I loved the reveal of that. So I feel like the reveal of Ezra actually being the one to kill Alison would be such a good thing. And I feel like I said, it would be this whole thing of Ezra being obsessed with her. Also, after the death, I would keep the obsession thing up. So I would still keep the thing of he panicked and buried her in her backyard to kind of get the suspicion off him. No one would suspect a thing. But then when the body is found, I feel like, you know how like A was playing with like the body parts and like the teeth and like moving the body around all the time on like the Halloween train? I would kind of have Ezra do that instead of A, in terms of like he's so obsessed with her that even after the death he would be obsessed with just the body and the murder and become so captivated by it that he would dig her body up and move her body around and taunt people with her body, because he's so proud of the work that he's done, because he's such a dark character. I think it would be so interesting to go down that route of, this is very disturbing, because it also makes sense as in the Pretty Little Liars books, Ezra's relationship with Arya gets found out and he gets arrested and he gets fired, and after that, that's kind of it for Ezra. And I always thought it was interesting once I had read the books, that the fact that the show decided to keep Ezra. So I feel like this would be a good kind of reasoning or justification for keeping Ezra, because they kind of didn't really need to keep Ezra on the show, and there was big parts where he was kind of like, why is he still here? Clap if you care. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like this would be a good, this is why he stayed, because he's involved in this big thing. But also it kind of makes sense with the fact that he's writing the book and that he went after Arya. It would be a thing of he became so obsessed with the murder, so obsessed with what he did, still so obsessed with Alison, to the point where he's literally writing a book about it, and then he is targeting Arya kind of like as his next prey, but also for like kind of insider information about Alison and learning more about Alison. And then it's even more disturbing when you get to the fact that he becomes a teacher at Rosewood High to kind of stalk on like his next prey, like I said with Arya, but also get inside information again in terms of like, what are people saying about the murder? Is anyone catching on to the murder? And to also give off this like nice guy persona that he gives. We obviously explore that a lot at the start, especially with Arya's parents. They always label him as the nice guy until they find out about the relationship. I feel like this would also be why Ezra's like presented as like this really nice, wouldn't harm a fly type of thing. So the fact that he would be covering up this murder, I feel like it connects everything together, but it also enhances the dark layer of Ezra, because we know, the audience, once you kind of dive into Ezra, how disturbing he actually is. But I feel like the show doesn't really present it, because the show wants you to kind of like root for Arya and Ezra. You can't really root for anybody else, like relationship wise with them two. No one in the show really is like, guys, do we think this relationship might actually be against the law? Do you know what I mean? It gets brushed over, and I think it's because Ezra has this really like nice guy persona about him. So I feel like that would tie into the fact that he murdered Alison. Kind of like when Alison comes back in the show around season 4-5. That's when I would have the reveal. And then kind of everything resets after season 5. And obviously season 5, we kind of shift on to like Spencer's story and things like that. But I feel like the reveal, it would kind of be similar to how they found out about the book, in terms of like Ezra takes Arya to this lodge. Arya kind of finds out he's very suspicious of what's going on here. And then I would actually have the A lair under the lodge, kind of like in the basement. And then Arya goes down there and she sees everything. Not that he's A, but kind of like the whole, she thinks he's A. And then he explains everything to Arya. Arya panics, runs. Ezra chases after Arya. And like that's when they kind of find out about Ezra killing Alison. I think I would do a thing where Ezra tries to kill Arya as well, but is unsuccessful and then gets arrested or something like that. Like maybe the girls have found out about him killing Alison at the same time and kind of called the police and sent them to the lodge and whatever and things like that. I think that would just be a really cool way to kind of tie Ezra in and to really enhance that this guy is not a nice guy and is not someone that we should be rooting for. And I think it fits kind of his story with kind of being obsessed with like teenage girls, to be honest. And the obsession becomes too much that he's actually just like so proud of his work. And I think writing the book really signifies that as well. Like he's written this book about Alison and about the murder because he did the murder, and has become so captivated by it. My next set of suspects for Alison's murder is actually the Pretty Little Liars themselves. I've kind of had to change the story because I've not really involved Emily in this story, because I think with Emily's story and how much she loved Alison, it wouldn't really make sense. But in this, the liars kind of did it together type of thing, help each other within kind of like covering it up. The liars obviously went through so much with Alison, and they all kind of like had their triggers started by Alison DiLaurentis. Hannah had her ED. Spencer was so gaslighted by Alison, and there was so much tension. They would argue all the time about like Ian and things like that. And then Arya, Alison knew about her father's affair, was like trying to spill it, whatever. So they all kind of had their things that Alison was kind of like targeting them for within like the show. And I find it really interesting with Cece's motive for being a lot of it was because the liars felt like they're more free without Alison in their lives. So I feel like this is a really key thing to kind of hang on to here in terms of like, I think the liars' motive for killing Alison, and by the way, I'll get to how they kill her and stuff in a second, because there's nothing intentional. It's not like they planned to kill Alison. It was kind of an accident. But I feel like having that statement of like the liars feel more free without Alison kind of backs up the motive that the girls would have for kind of like covering things up. Also, like, the show is literally called Pretty Little Liars, plural. As a group, they are lying, and obviously they have their own individual secrets, and like that's why like they're all liars, whatever. But I feel like the title itself, Pretty Little Liars, they're a group of liars. And especially because I know the intro scene shouldn't really hold that much weight, but with the intro scene of them all kind of standing around her like casket at like her funeral, I feel like that could add like, oh my god, like it's kind of like, I feel like it would be a reveal where it kind of makes you like, oh my god, yes, like it's so obvious type of thing. Because even in the title credits itself, we're told that these girls have gathered around Alison's dead body. And I know the intro is like not really too much taken into account, but I feel like that would be a cool thing in terms of like, oh my god, how actually obvious was it this whole time? Like it was literally under our nose this entire time. I've mentioned this before, but I've played a game probably like 6 years ago now called Heavy Rain. And within this game, you kind of have to find out who this serial killer is. And you play as 3 different characters throughout the entire game, and you kind of swap back and forth between them. You play as 4 characters, actually, my bad. And you end up finding the serial killer is actually one of the characters that you play, but you don't know this entire time. And it kind of reminds me of something like that. Like, we have these group of girls, and we're kind of like, you know, we're rooting for them. Like, these are the main characters, we want them to do well. However, when we find out that actually these main characters that we've been following throughout the entire show actually committed the main murder of the show, I think would be really interesting, because these girls know they've done it, but we don't. But we feel like we know everything about the liars and the girls because we get an insight into their lives. So I think that's really an interesting route to go down. But it also explains why we learn about Alison through flashbacks through the eyes of the girls. We only see Alison through their perspective, and most of the flashbacks are presenting Alison in a bad way, and it's very rare for Alison to be presented as a good way in the flashbacks. So I think it's interesting that we learn Alison through the eyes of them. So we're kind of seeing the timeline of when things went sour and when things went bad and when things started to really kind of like blow up in their faces. Do you know what I mean? We're almost kind of finding out the route to her murder through these flashbacks, but like at the time we don't really know that, but we're kind of like getting the motives, getting the tensioning up, and kind of getting to that end point slowly of when we find out that these girls are actually responsible for the murder. And I feel like I would almost like twist A to the point where actually A is not trying to blackmail the girls, like to like kind of just target them for fun. A is actually out to get the girls because A knows that the girls killed Alison. So I think it would be another like, oh, like A this whole time has actually like not been the good guy, but just been like trying to get like justice because they actually did do something wrong here. I think that would be a nice different view of A to kind of have, because like that's kind of AD's motive. The girls obviously didn't kill Cece, but Cece's dead and things like that. So like that's kind of like the AD motive. So I think that would be a cool kind of route, because we get to see A kind of in a different perspective, where it's like, oh, actually the girls did do something wrong and A is after them for kind of good reason. I think the main liar I would actually have to kind of initiate the murder is Spencer. I think it makes sense to be Spencer. I think Spencer, out of the liars, along with Arya, are probably the only two who I think have it in them to do something like that. But it'd all go back to the night that Alison went missing, and I would take it back to, you know, when Alison went back to the barn after she drugged the girls. I feel like the girls would wake up, but everyone but Emily wakes up, because I think Emily's story in terms of like her love for Alison, I don't think Emily could have kept it a secret from us and from people in Rosewood and stuff for such a long period of time. So I'm gonna not involve Emily in this, just because like I genuinely don't think that like the story could progress if Emily was involved in the murder, because she loved Alison so much. But Hannah, Arya, and Spencer wake up and they're kind of fuming at Alison because they're like, what did you do to us? And Alison admits that she had drugged the girls to find out if they had kind of like been blackmailing her. And I feel like Spencer would be enraged, because Spencer at this time was very like off the rails and dealing with her own kind of addiction and things like that. So I feel like Spencer would be enraged, and I feel like an argument would like brew out in the barn. So I feel like Alison would storm out of the barn being like, I've had enough of this. But then Spencer like follows her, because Spencer's like fully enraged and she doesn't want this argument to like there's still so much to argue about. So she goes after Alison, and then Arya and Hannah follow Spencer. And the reveal I think would be really cool in terms of, you know, the flashbacks where we see Spencer with the shovel. I feel like throughout the show we should see each girl with the shovel, but we don't know which one's the real one. So then when it gets to the actual reveal, we see that Spencer is the one carrying the shovel this whole time, and Spencer is the one to hit the final blow. So I feel like Spencer would get so mad and so enraged that she just hits Alison from behind, probably trying not to kill her, just kind of like stop her from going anywhere and like get her to the ground. But I feel like it would knock her unconscious, and Hannah and Arya are like, oh my gosh, oh, that is not.
Oh, that's not. In the sense that,
what are we doing here? Do you know what I mean? But I feel like the girls would like make some kind of pact to kind of protect each other. And I feel like Arya would be the one to bury Alison. So they all take her to the you know, where Alison was buried. And I feel like Arya would have the guts to be the one to bury her. And ultimately, burying her would be the thing to kill her. So technically, although Spencer did the blow, I feel like Arya would, you know, be the final one, kind of because she buried her alive, kind of suffocated her to death. So I feel like that would be really cool. And I like the idea of the reveal being, like I said, like with the flashbacks and like us trying to like find out, okay, which one of these girls has been carrying the shovel this whole time. And then we finally get to the point where we think, oh, Spencer's killed her because she's carrying the shovel, but actually it's been Arya. But also I think it would make sense in terms of like where the girls went kind of after Alison went missing, because Arya left for a year, and obviously it was to do with her dad's kind of like affair, but I feel like there would be more to it in terms, if we go with this story, in terms of like Arya had to get away and went away to Iceland to get away from everything. And then Hannah obviously had her whole kind of like becoming popular glow up type of thing. And I feel like this would be because she knows that Alison has gone completely, and she kind of like wants to replace Alison, but also is more free to kind of be herself. And I feel like that would kind of make sense there. Spencer didn't really change that much in the year she went missing, but because she was focusing on rebuilding the barn, she wanted to kind of like get rid of evidence or kind of get rid of the situation, and spent her entire summer doing that to kind of get away and have a distraction. And I think when Alison's body is found, I think the liars would successfully kind of like frame Ian for the murder, because now that Ian's dead, who's going to question Ian about the murder? So I feel like the liars would get away with it and would add more depth, and it would be a much darker way to get the story going, because obviously like the liars are involved, and I feel like you would then have to change what happens after like season 4, because I feel like you couldn't just forget it and like move on. But I think it would be cool if something like that happened, just to involve the liars like a little bit more into the like actual main plot, because I think it's quite obvious to be the liars and have the liars involved. But I think that's what makes it so good, because like under our nose this whole time, it's actually literally been staring right at us and like right at our face. And I just think it would be like an interesting route to go down, to involve them in that kind of like twisted, like dark way. But there would have to be changes, because like I said, I don't think Emily could be involved, because Emily loves Alison way too much. And then I think when Emily finds out that the lies has something to do with it, like there would have to be so much you would have to change about the story to fit this happening. So it's not really my favorite way to go down with all of the suspects I have here, but I think it's a good route we could have taken. I wouldn't have minded if this had happened, because I kind of like it's so much more darker. I think because the show is surrounding these pretty little liars, and we get to explore each of their trauma, and especially with Alison, I think the girls would have plenty of motive to want to not maybe intentionally murder her, but kind of cover it up. And they want to live their lives without Alison, and that was Cece's whole motive for literally being A. So yeah, I think there's some weight to that one. Okay, so my third suspect, and I don't know if this is my favorite to one, is I quite like Ezra's one, but I really liked the idea of Jason being Alison's killer. This one's a bit less, I mean, it's still very dark, but the way I've written it, it's to the point where like Jason doesn't really know actually what he's done here. Obviously, we know that Jason was high that night that Alison went missing and wasn't really there with it, and I feel like it would include something like that, in terms of like he did something and he doesn't remember. And I would have Mrs. DiLaurentis heavily involved in this story. I think Mrs. DiLaurentis would be the one to kind of cover it up and not tell Jason actually what happened that night. Early in the show, Jason gets a note from Janet and Garrett. We know now it was like to cover up their own thing, but we get a note. Jason gets a note saying, "I know what you did," but Jason doesn't know anything about that night, so he worries for a period of time that he actually hurt Alison, but doesn't know that he hurt Alison. So I'm kind of like sticking with that kind of like story, because I don't think Jason would intentionally want to kill his sister. Through the show, we see they don't really have a good relationship pre-disappearance. They do get quite violent here and there, and they don't really like each other. They're quite mean. But I don't think Jason would get to the point where he wanted to maliciously kill Alison. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it would have to be some type of mistake. I think there's so many layers to Jason, and I don't know, I just find Jason such an interesting character, because he actually has so much trauma through the show that no one really talks about that much. And I don't know, I find him so interesting because he goes through so much, especially with his family. His family is very dysfunctional. And when Peter gets revealed as his dad, like, he doesn't really care. Like, Peter just doesn't really care about Jason. And then he was involved with the NAT club. Like, there are so many layers to Jason, and he's such, like, a mysterious character, and they always put so much mystery around him just for him to be just a normal, like, guy. So like I said, I feel like this death would have to be an accident. And one of the ways I've gone down is, we know that Jason liked to party with his friends and have his friends over and things like that. And I'm kind of gone down the route that the night she went missing, if he had like his friends over, but Alison was being really annoying, really loud, and just like, I'm gonna tell mum and dad what you're doing and whatever, to the point where he actually spiked her and drugged her to kind of like get her to just like fall asleep and just like stay out of his business. But maybe it got to the point where he actually put too much into Alison, and Alison died that way. And then Mrs. DiLaurentis found the body, buried her alive, and then kind of protected Jason and gaslit Jason into believing that like nothing happened and she had just like left and they didn't know where she was, because the parents had gaslighted Jason plenty of times, so they're very used to the concept of gaslighting Jason, lying to him and things like that. So I feel like when it would eventually get to the reveal, it would be a lot less like malicious and a lot more somber, and like Jason would discover what happened and he would want to go to the police, but Jessica's like, no, like you can't go to the police, and tries to stop him, but he goes anyway. And then I feel like this conversation, I would have Cece like listening in on the conversation, and it gets Cece so mad because she loved Alison that she ends up actually killing Jessica DiLaurentis. And like, I think that would like tie the story in a lot more, like to kind of like get revenge for Alison. But then I would go down the route of maybe Jason knew about Bethany and that Bethany was dangerous and after his family, so he hit Alison thinking it was Bethany, kind of like how Cece did it. Jessica buried her alive and then obviously protected Jason that way, because like Mrs. DiLaurentis already lost a child, well, she thought she did with Alison, well, she did in the end anyway, in my story. So I feel like she would want to protect Jason, because one thing about Jessica DiLaurentis, she did love her kids and she did want to protect her children. So I feel like it would be 100% the same thing, in terms of like, she would want to protect Jason, and then when Jason finds out, he's so distraught that he did it that he just hands himself into the police and kind of confesses to everything. Because I feel like if Jason found out, I don't think it would be a thing that he could live with. I think he would absolutely crumble under the pressure of knowing what he did to Alison. So I think very much it would be kind of that, and I feel like that's something he wouldn't be able to live with, would just like hand himself in. So I feel like it could be maybe underwhelming for the audience, but I feel like Jason being up for the murder is like kind of interesting. I don't know, I remember there was a really specific line that Jessica DiLaurentis said to, I can't remember who she said it to, but she said to never turn your back on a Hastings. And technically Jason is like half Hastings, so what if Alison had kind of, you know, her back turned to Jason and Jason hit her the same way that Cece did, and like that's kind of what she's alluding to, but we obviously don't connect the dots. And then like I said, I think that would tie into Cece killing Jessica, because like Jessica covered it all up, and like I don't know, I kind of like it, like just kind of like involving the whole family and involving Jason a bit more, because honestly the point of Jason, like I feel like after a certain point there's really no point for Jason to be there, do you know what I mean? So I feel like it would just tie him into the story a bit more. I think it would be super interesting in that fact, in like that aspect and things like that. And I think it would fit in with the theme of Jessica DiLaurentis kind of protecting her children and keeping it from Jason. And I feel like this whole time it would have just been like a whole accident and a whole miscommunication, to the point where like he didn't know he did it, so he didn't know that he had to confess to anything. I don't know, I think it's just like interesting to take that route. I think notable suspects I would have up there is actually Lucas. I find Lucas a really interesting character. I think Lucas has a lot of layers to him as a character as well, so I think it would be interesting to maybe involve Lucas here and there, because I think like he's so actually interesting. So for him to have done it, kind of like he had enough of the bullying and just like did it, I don't know, I wouldn't like put it past him to do something like that and to like kind of like cover it up and kind of lose control and then like become friends with Hannah and like maybe like confess to Hannah and things like that. I think that would be really, really interesting. I kind of like the idea that someone actually did kill Alison and that Alison did actually die, because the whole time I think you kind of know that Alison's not really dead and there's much more to the story and things like that. But I feel like it would have been interesting, like, actually no, Alison did die and like one of these characters did it. I think my favorite might be the Ezra thing, just because like it's so dark and I feel like it makes the most sense to be like completely obsessed with someone to the point where like you would go that far, because like someone would have to go that far to kill her. And kind of like with the liars, I've mentioned it was kind of like an accident. With Jason it was an accident, but with Ezra it would be like a malicious thing to be doing, and then would kind of hold more consequences past the night she went missing, with, you know, being obsessed with the body, and like getting a job as a teacher in the same school, and kind of wanting to still be like surrounded by Alison with kind of knowing her friends and things like that. I think it would add so many more layers to Ezra, honestly, and I think it would be a super interesting route to take the character down. But also I think because of Alison's kind of failed redemption arc when she came back, I don't think it would have been a bad thing to kill her off, really, because when she came back there wasn't really much to her character, and I feel like Rosewood had outgrown Alison to the point they don't really need her anymore. So I don't know, I think it would be cool to discover actually like no, she is dead. Also maybe Wilden as like a corrupt officer, possibly, because that's similar in aspect of like with the books Wilden's actually a nice guy, but in the show they've taken a totally different route with him, so it would also make sense if like Wilden maybe had done it. But I think these are like my top 3 who I would have done it for. Obviously we would have to like rewrite the story because things would have to have consequences, but I kind of like them. That is it for this video. Let me know your opinions down below, but also who would you have killed Alison DiLaurentis? Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.